Good morning, everybody. I spent an entire week at level camp, grinded out a bunch of Reaper XP, and did quests ranging from Reaper 4 to Reaper 10 on this Eldritch Knight Sorcerer build, so that way I could finalize both what I think its entire purpose is, how good it is, and what you should consider as the limit when you try to play this type of character. Now, the first thing I wanted to address is a comment I got in a lot of one of the first things I wanted to address was that several people asked me, why would I play Sorcerer over Wizard when Wizard gets more feats? The answer to that question is simply because I like casting at double the speed and having more spell points, and the extra feats don't really impact this character too much because of how spread out they are. Sorcerers and Wizards have to take all of their feats pretty late in the game for their combat feats, unlike a fighter who's taking feats at Level 1, Level 6, Level 9, Level 11. This character, while you get your combat style feat at Level 1, doesn't get its next combat style feat until 12. It doesn't get improved critical until 18, and it doesn't get its final combat style feat until level 21. As a result, since your feats are so spread out, you can fit in many spellcasting feats if you like. In fact, I took Completionist on this character because I have it, but it's definitely not necessary to actually have a good experience with this build. Now that being said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with playing the Wizard variant of this character. It's just important to note that you will want to be spending some points into the Harper Agent tree, and then possibly also the Feydark Illusionist tree to get access to Greater Color Spray, because that will also help you out quite a bit. So with this character, I ended up deciding to go with a mostly damage-based build. I avoided using the spellcasting for the most part on this character. I really wanted to make it so I could have high DCs and high damage, but I just couldn't get all of the stats that I needed to work on one character. As of right now, while the fall set is an awesome set, a lot of the items conflict with some of the previous item sets that you need to build together. This character ended up using the Part of the Family set from Sharn, as well as trying to use the Autumn set, but most of the good Autumn items happen to be gloves and necklaces, which conflicts with the set. As a result, I couldn't get enough spell DCs to be able to make this character work DC-wise, and I decided that it would be better to just focus on the damage, swapping out several items from the fall set, putting in some items from the winter set for some actual defense, as well as using some of the belts from Ravenloft to get a lot of additional damage on hit. Where I ended up with this character was a character that didn't really have a lot of spell DCs, however, had a lot of non-critical damage. Each attack was adding somewhere between 600 to 800 elemental damage on hit, as well as bonus elemental damage from my legendary Scion feat, on top of the actual physical damage I was doing. This meant when I wasn't critically striking against certain monsters, such as Reapers or plant-type creatures, I was still hitting them for a reasonable amount of damage, and allowed me to be quite successful. And since I was just focusing on as much universal spell power as possible, I could flip-flop and change between my different elements with ease without really losing any damage. And on top of that, my repair ability was absolutely massive, allowing me to keep myself fully healed even all the way through Reaper 6 and 7. Although it got a bit dicey from 8 to 10, where sometimes you need some external influence. So what should you expect from this sort of character? Well, I'm not going to tell you that this character is going to be better performing than a Spellcaster Sorcerer. Spellcaster Sorcerer has access to Mass Hold Monster, which is extremely strong, as well as having great access to high damaging spells once you get your DCs sorted out. It's really hard to say that Eldritch Knight is the best way to go about it when Spellcaster Sorcerer has such a commanding lead over what should be considered an offensive caster. So this character mostly just provides something a little bit different, an alternative to that regular playstyle. Where I found this fitting, and as some of the footage you've seen, is me essentially being able to solo Reaper 4 at Endgame, which I think is fairly good for this type of character. Now granted, this will require you to have the gear, so you'll want to make sure you farm out the appropriate items before you attempt to go soloing something on Reaper 4, but even without the Reaper points that I had, assuming that you had the equipment that I had, in fact even better equipment since I was missing a bunch of items at the time of recording, you should be able to do something very similar. And if you like this character and the leveling process, since it was an extremely easy breeze, this could be something that you could do yourself if you wanted to get a bunch of Reaper XP. Simply get this character up to 30, farm out the items, and then once you have them, run all of the quests on Reaper 4 with this character, solo or even open up in a group, let people join in, run all those quests, earn yourself about 400,000 Reaper XP, reincarnate as the same build, get yourself back up to 30, strap on all that equipment, and do the same thing. Using an XP potion, you could have your entire Reaper XP done in 9 or 10 lives, which is kind of crazy. And that's one of the things I just like about this character. It was pretty easy, it was reliable, and it had some fun and engaging gameplay moments. I like playing melee and getting into the thick of things and having a lot of good options for attacking monsters. And it just feels so good to watch you not get a critical strike on a monster, but you just chunk down down its health anyway, especially Reapers. Reapers have no type of elemental resistance whatsoever, and so you just beat them down. Now, it is important to note that your elemental damage is a large portion of your auto attack damage, so make sure you are swapping to the appropriate element when you're fighting a creature that is immune. So facing off against Abishai, make sure you're picking the right elemental damage type to ensure that you're always able to damage each individual one, as missing it on that damage will feel really nasty. Now, I'm not going to go into the full build here. I'm just going to talk to you mostly about the changes and some of the things that I would make. If you would like to learn more about how to build it from scratch and also see what the final incarnation is, check the description of this video for a link to the full build, as well as all of the items that I recommend you should equip to make this character as strong as it can possibly be for what I was trying to play it. I also am going to make no claim that this character is the best way to play Sorcerer, but it's something I really enjoyed, and I like melee. It's also very easy to play, so much so that during my live stream, I was actually having a heart issue, and I was unable to play for a short period of time, and yet still able to do Reaper 4 no problem without even really thinking about it. So again, just something to consider as we move on to the character build. So let's break it down. What does make this character work, and how can you build it out? So here I am in the Feywild. My ending stats here, not super impressive on this character because I'm missing a bunch of items, and I didn't have the patience to go farm them because I wanted to try something new, but I figured out what would make this character work in the endgame as a final couple of pieces, so that way you yourself can have a good experience with this character. Your stats, physical resistance rating is going to be somewhere around 240. Magical resistance rating going to be somewhere around 120 once you actually get your character's gear figured out. In fact, probably higher than that because I sadly am missing quite a few important items. Most importantly with this character, things that I am not missing is universal spell power. All my spell powers are reasonably high, and they get even higher when I actually turn on a lot of my character buffs that I will do here in just a second. But this is a follow-up, so I'm not going to be going through some of the basics. Essentially, this build is still staying two-handed. I experimented around with the idea of going two-weapon fighter or even single-weapon fighter to get more set bonuses from Feywild, and I figured this would be the absolute best way to do it. My skills haven't changed, of course, still using Concentration and Spellcraft, and use Magic Device. If you only get to pick one, go with your Magic Device and then Spellcraft. I took Concentration so I wouldn't have to lose spells in the late game. Now, a couple of things I would change with the feats specifically. Very importantly, I wouldn't change out my Metamagic feats. I'd still take Quicken. However, with this character, I would make an adjustment to my Epic feat. A couple of them, actually. Originally, I took Scion of the Plane of Air, and this feat was supposed to give me extra evocation DCs so I could do some evocation stuff. Turns out I don't actually need to do this. This is irrelevant, because most of my spells aren't going to land anyway. So as a result, instead of taking Scion of the Plane of Air, I recommend that you take Scion of the Plane of Fire if possible. Fire damage is pretty good. You're usually going to have somebody in your party who strips fire immunity off of monsters, whether they're an alchemist, a sorcerer, or a druid. So that's usually going to be pretty good for you. And on top of that, it grants extra magic resistance rating and physical resistance rating and extra spell crit damage. Now, you actually do deal spell critical damage, just not very often since you don't have a lot of spell crit in this build, but it's still nice to have. Now, I did say that some of your spells don't land all the time, but some of the most important ones do. In fact, one of the ones I use all the time is Polar Ray. This spell is absolutely fantastic, deals a ton of additional damage, and I highly recommend just throwing this in whenever you can, because it has no save, so it's basically like just free damage on monsters. Other than that, I did take Arcane Warrior. It has a couple of weird bugs, so depending on what style of content you want to play, I would recommend potentially changing up your build a little bit. So to give you an easy example, Arcane Warrior here has a bit of a problem in that it works really well. The Arcane Warrior Physical and the Arcane Warrior Magical gives you a ton of extra stats. 40 Universal Spell Power from one feat and 20 Melee and Range Power is actually really good, and they stack up at exactly the same rate as your Force's Point and Force's Edge, which you get as a Eldritch Knight. However, important thing to note about this feat, now that I've had the time to play around with it, it has two problems. One, you're not always going to be casting spells. However, this can be remedied by simply using the spell Magic Missile. It's a first level spell. It can be thrown out extremely easily and has almost no animation time, especially if you decide to quicken it, and it gives you stacks very, very quickly. So I highly recommend using Magic Missile a lot in combat if you can, because it literally barely interrupts your animations. And more importantly than this, this ability does not work on purple-named creatures. So any, like, raid boss style monster, Arcane Warrior doesn't function on. This is a bug, and it will likely get fixed, but not anytime soon. as I know that there are probably more pressing things and pressing bugs coming out for the Dungeons & Dragons Online team. So if you're unsure about this feat, you can just go with the classic of Dire Charge, and that will work well for you, although my item build doesn't fit in Stunning, so you'll have to think about where you want to get that. But Arcane Warrior is still useful, but if you are planning on going mostly for raiding, you could consider using something else. Other than that, I think I kept all of the feats the same as the first video, so you can check that one, or in the description for how to build it. And then again, the spells are pretty much exactly the same. I didn't change anything. Now, as far as the enhancements go, I also didn't muck about with the enhancements too much, but I realized you actually don't need to spend any points in Fire Savant. So these points here, the Feydark Illusionist, the Eldritch Knight, and the Warforged, these points add up exactly to 81. So you can cut out 1 point from somewhere, probably just take out this Charisma from Feydark Illusionist if you only have 80 points, and if you have any more than 80 points, this is exactly what I would take on this every time, and then spend your other points wherever you want in whatever trees. I did spend my points here in Fire Savant, but in hindsight, I probably would have spent it in Air Savant, or not Earth Savant, or Water Savant to increase the spell power and ability of my Polar Ray. So just keep that in mind. That's probably how I would have done this in the future. But yeah, so that's just that's an important detail there. So these are the most important parts, and this is stuff that I would never change. This is all very good. A bunch of people have asked me about the possibility of a multi-class. Would it be better to take, you know, an 18 sorcerer with 1 level of favorite soul and maybe 1 level of fighter for an extra feat, or something else like that? At the end of the day, that is a different build than I was trying to do. I was focusing on maxing out this spell sword dice damage, and so getting the extra spell power for my character was kind of important to make all of that work. So that's essentially why I wanted to do this. If you swap out to one of those other builds, you're playing a different character. If you do decide, the second you take off this core, this capstone, you're losing a spell sword die and d12s, effectively cutting your damage that you're dealing by about 20-25% with your elemental damage. And since that's such a big cut on that base damage, and you're gaining a lot of extra physical damage from now being a favorite soul and having access to something like Divine Might, or even if you want to take 2 Paladin to get access to Divine Might is also a fine option. I would say for this character specifically, I would probably make the adjustment to change up the item build to focus less on spell power, maybe focus mostly on repair spell power, and even then maybe you want to drop more points. So I'm not exactly sure how you would build that, but it would be a different character build than what I am trying to do. So just keep that in mind. Not something that you can't do, just different than what I was going for and what my end goal was with this character. Now, as far as the Epic Destiny goes, I did stay in Fatesinger, but I made a couple adjustments with my twists. And actually, I need to change up a couple things. I should have gotten rid of this Metamagic Attunement and Bolden, because this ability actually doesn't really affect it because I don't cast too many spells, so this should be changed to Intensify if you have it, but everything else in here is still pretty much the same. Having Extend on all your spells is amazing, and I love having it, as well as Masquerade. This is nice because when you change up to the final item build, you will not have a 10% spell cost reduction, and that's just good to have on any type of spellcaster. Now, my twist that I decided to use, Sense Weakness, is essential. It's so powerful to give you a lot of extra damage against anything that is helpless, and you can make stuff helpless all the time with Greater Color Spray very easily. Another ability I used is Tsunami, because it looks like Tsunami just always works. It just always knocks down targets all the time, regardless of what this DC or ability score says, and it ignores the range restrictions of being a Eldritch Knight. So I use this all the time, and it costs 50 mana, which is fine, but I have like thousands that I don't use on anything because I'm a melee class. So essentially, with Tsunami and Greater Color Spray, you can, troll around in R10 and be able to solo pretty much a pack of monsters, assuming that they don't get a couple hits on you first. You can knock them down with Tsunami and then just rip them to bits and have a good time. And finally, Dance of Flowers for extra damage, Dragon Hide for some extra Fortitude saves no longer failing on a 1, and extra action boost. Now, it's important to note, extra action boost is pretty important, so if you don't have all of these twists, Sense Weakness and Tsunami are pretty essential, and then I would go with extra action boost. Then, if you have extra points, go with Dragon Hide, and then a Dance of Flowers last, because if you're dead, you're doing no additional damage. As far as Reaper points goes, I've always said this before, spend your points in the defensive trees before you go into the offensive trees, and Charisma is important, and so is melee power. You want to get as much melee power as possible. You don't need the spell DCs, you don't need the spell penetration. I just didn't change those because it costs like 200,000 platinum to change, and I didn't want to spend that money. But that's kind of how I would do it. And then finally, as far as actual individual items go, My build is still in shambles, so I'll post the actual build that I recommend that you do use. A couple key items that I'm missing that I would love to include in this is the Blood Rage Chrism trinket. This trinket is insane if you're using a two-handed character, and pretty much every two-handed character is using it, because it gives 30 physical and magical resistance rating and an additional 10 double strike that stacks with all of your other damage. Additionally, I was using the Legendary Battle Award medal as an interim. However, I would, because it gave me quality charisma, because I would use the Sunken Slippers in this build, being very, very potent, and instead swap in, instead of quality intelligence, put in quality charisma here to give yourself a little bit more extra stats. I'll also post a more defensive version using some of the winter set as well, in case you want to make an adjustment to yourself to get a little bit more defensive power. I think that works anyway. We'll see. There may not be a winter set if the items don't work out, but last time I looked, it seemed not too bad. Also, a bit of an adjustment. We're not using the belt from the Autumn set anymore in favor of using both the Burn Scar Sash and the Thrumming Spark Cord, which I have keybound so I can swap between them whenever I need to. And then finally, for an artifact, we're using the Stolen Signet of Irwin because it gives charisma and exceptional alluring skills, quality potency, and electric absorb. It's just a nice artifact to have. Now for filigrees on this character, it's pretty basic. The weapon that I'm currently using is Torn. It is not the weapon that I recommend you use. If you have options, I'll have it in the build guide, but essentially Tale of Sulamares is going to be your best bet. After that would be Baz Marath, then Torn, and then Tale of the Scorpion. So if you don't want to raid, get yourself a Tale of the Scorpion out of the Toxic Treatment quest, and that's good enough. But I had this weapon, so I just used this weapon, and it was fine for the most part. The filigrees that I'm currently using are Shattered Device and Prowess. You might not think Prowess is actually that good, but a lot of quests are pretty short, and you only have, I believe I have 12 right now, action boost uses, which would go down to 9 once I swap out this trinket. But that's actually okay, because I don't think that you need more than 9 action boost uses since you're playing in Fatesinger. You'll be able to get to a shrine to refill your action boost. No matter what quest you're basically playing, you'll always be able to get to a shrine because there's no shrine that's more than 9 fights away, unless you're doing one of these horrible quests like Black and Blue, where there's just really long hallways and lots of monsters and only like 2 shrines in the entire quest, where you're just kind of spending a lot of time walking around and waiting for stuff to happen. A Shatter Device is also good because not only does it increase your ability to do stuff, but also in your allies by reducing the enemy physical and magical resistance rating. So that's basically it. That's kind of the build. I had a lot of fun with it. Of course, this does have a lot of things that you need to make sure you're paying attention to. So turning on your Knight's Transformation. Every time you die, you have to turn on your Pseudo-Dragon Familiar again. So you want to make sure you're summoning that, who will constantly get resummoned and fall through you. You got to make sure you're turning on your Spell Sword when you log in. And of course, I have mine keybound right here, so I can easily swap between my 2 belts if I want to use the Spell Sword Shock or the Spell Sword Frost. I have the Thrumming Spark Cord, and if I want to use the Acid or Fire, I swap to the Burn Scar Sash. It's also important to note that as a Fatesinger, you get a feat called Inspire Courage. What this does is after being used on yourself or your allies, it's essentially with the points in Fatesinger and an extra +4 to hit and damage, so make sure you are using that before you go in and decide to fight. And then finally, the last thing you want to make sure you buff at the beginning of a quest is Imbue Shadow. This ability basically gives you an extra +1 to hit and damage, and also makes this your weapons don't break anymore. Now, if you like this cool glow that I have going on my weapon, this is a cosmetic weapon. This is the essentially the Feydark illusion cosmetic effect that you can now get from the Saga. So if you don't have this one, it's very, very cool. It is the Illusory Shadow Glamored Weapon Aura. It comes from the Saga. I don't know if it comes from the Heroic one, but it definitely comes from the Epic one, and it looks pretty neat. I think it might look better if I make a purple cosmetic. It doesn't fit with the cosmetic too much. I kind of went with the focus on blue and white with this character, using the Winter Eladrin armor set to mix in with some of the blue from the Knight's Transformation, and then I used a lot of white coloring from like the Reaper eyes and wings to kind of give this very imposing look on my character. However, the purple doesn't fit, but it still looks pretty neat. So we're going to be definitely making a purple gear set in the future to make this weapon aura look a little bit better. And now, once I actually have all of my spells active, and I cast them on myself, you'll notice again the physical resistance rating is going to go up. I somehow lost a bunch of magic resistance rating. I don't know how that works, but that's weird. So we're already up at 186. Then when you're in combat, you buff yourself up with Martial Hymn, which is an extra 10, as well as some magical resistance rating. And then, of course, once you get the Blood Rage Chrism, you're going to be up around 230. Inside Reaper mode, you're going to get even higher, so it's not too bad. On top of that, again, once I actually put on a lot of my buff spells, my abilities, I have my spell power is very high, and with my belt on, Electric is up to 977 spell power, with Cold trailing behind at 808. Even higher than this, if you want to, just take that extra step and go a little bit stronger. Remember that when you get into the quest and you're attacking monsters, which is essential, you get Force Point, as well as your Arcane Warrior, to give you an extra 60 spell power, and then on top of that you can also use Siphoning Strike for an extra 30 spell power, and your Action Boost spell power for an extra 30 spell power, and then the melee power. So this character benefits a lot from being in physical combat with people, because you're giving yourself over 120 additional spell power by just hitting stuff with your weapons, and then you're also getting yourself over 30 melee power by casting spells. So that's pretty cool. And extra hit and damage. So just keep that in mind with this type of character. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoy it and have fun with this character. I really like it. However, after this, my next character that I'm going to be showcasing and demoing for you guys is going to be a pure fighter doing a similar build, except instead of using magic and stuff, I'm just going to have a strength of 1 billion and try to crush people beneath an axe. So we're going to see how that compares to this character and kind of put it back and forth. But yeah, I like this character. It heals really easily. Keep yourself at full all the time, and because you have so much overhealing and so much repair amplification, it makes it very easy to keep yourself fully topped up even when you're doing Reaper mode and even when you're by yourself. That's all I have. Thank you for watching. I am now going to get a glass of water, so I won't be in the video anymore. See you later. Goodbye.